you over to the officer, and you may be thrown into prison. I tell you the truth, you will not get out until you have paid the last cent. And we go, okay, right, maybe that little badge of mine is not quite as shiny as I thought it was. And the reality is there's a couple of ways we could go with this. We could look at the things of how it affects us as individuals. We could also look at it in terms of how it affects us as a nation. And in light of the Old Testament, I decided to go down more of the nation route, and we can cover some of the other stuff at another time. But one of the issues we face, with things like you must not murder, is what happens when we start becoming more than just individuals, as a community. And one of the first things I'd like to talk about is, what about the death penalty for murder? This is a big one. And immediately we go, well, what should we be doing? The community and the nation, the government, if you want to put it that way, has a responsibility to look after us. That is part of why we elect them. They are there. I mean, if New Zealand was to get invaded, we'd all be very happy about the fact that we got called up to the army and have to fight. Well, most of us. There'll be some exceptions. But the reality is that in that case, they're actually asking you to start killing other people. So they expect that from us, so we can also expect them to look after us. And the question then becomes, this is a question of ethics, and there are no nice little tight boxes in ethics. We can try and make it down and say, well, this is the law and this is it, but it doesn't work that way. When we start looking at things like, the death penalty, we say, okay, we're against that. Great. But what happens if somebody murders somebody and then repeatedly does it again and again and again? At what point does the state say this is enough? What point, as we as a people, as we elect them, do we say this is enough? Do we have the right then to take that person's life? Now, one of the interesting things, I think, we don't think about these issues very much because we tend to focus very much on our own selves. But sometimes it's important to think about these things. And one of the things we need to think about is that, we have in here, you must not murder. And yet there are numerous cases, and hopefully the slides. Next one, please, Joe. There are numerous instances of what the Bible, Deuteronomy itself, I just took these from Deuteronomy, what it says that you should kill people for as a state. This was talking to the Jewish people. Murder, rape, adultery, which is an interesting one, stubborn, rebellious sons. Doesn't mention daughters. And again, and these are some of the things that it says, if this is the case, the parents should bring the son to the elders at the gate, and then they should stone the child. And we go, what? But this is in the same book where it says you must not murder. So what's going on? And it's interesting, if you look at in the passage we've just read from the New Testament, Jesus is talking about getting thrown into prison and you won't get out until you've paid the last cent. Jesus, in all of his conversations, never once talked about the fact that the Romans were crucifying people. He never once talked about the fact that there was debtors' prisons and stuff like that. Because we have to balance these two. We have it in our own internal lives. We must not murder, and that is very, very true. If we hate somebody, we have a problem, and that is not only destructive to us, which is the main problem with it, but it's also against what God wants. But when we start looking in the broader picture of a community, there are rules and regulations that we need in order to keep that functioning. We live in a broken world. We have to accept the fact that some people are more broken than others, and in some cases that break is such that we have to do something about it. What do we do about things like prison? Is prison the best answer for crime? Or is it just a school to help them get to the next level? Should they work for their living in prison? Why should the state pay for them to be there? Why can't they work for their living? These are big questions. There are no answers that are easy and nice. There are no little boxes that we can put things into. But we have to ask these questions and say to ourselves, what are we trying to accomplish as a nation in terms of how we handle people who don't follow the rules, who cause problems, who rape, who murder? What do we do? How do we handle them? I don't think prison is probably the best method. I mean, one of the things that the issues like in the States, which still has the death penalty in some of the states, is the cost of it. The main reason why a lot of the states, in particularly Southern America, have given up on it is because of the cost. By the time you've paid for all the appeals and all the things, it actually costs less to throw them into prison for 20 years. The other problem they've got is the fact that the methods they use are pretty barbaric and quite often do not work as intended. And so actually shooting them would actually be easier, but we don't like that because it's more barbaric. But pumping them full of nitrogen or poison gas or whatever, and all sorts of different methods are being tried, sometimes they work, sometimes they don't, or sometimes they take 20 minutes to die. And so you have that against the death penalty. People say, well, it's not humane. And so this is an issue that we have to ask as a people and have to look at and say, what is our view of the death penalty? And then there is no easy answer. But one of the critical things that we come back to, and this is really where the rubber actually hits the road. And one thing I can say with 100% certainty, God is interested in justice. And this is the big problem with a lot of this. If we look in America, for example, majority of people who are shot are African American, which is a nice oxymoron in itself because they're actually born in America. They're Americans, full stop. But the thing is we call them African American because that way we're politically correct, but we can still distinguish them from us. And this is from a European American, a United States white person's point of view. They're different again, so we can distinguish them. It came out in one of the states that the cops were carrying guns in the car that they could put on the person they'd shot, so they didn't have to explain why they shot them. That I can say with 100% certainty, God is not going to look with favour upon. And this is where it really boils down to. We can look at America and go, yes, what about the prison population here in New Zealand? 90% Maori? Again, we have a problem. Justice is not being done. And God will not be happy with us. And this is a part of a bigger problem. If we have justice, a lot of this goes away. We can then have things like the death penalty, and it won't be unfair because it's not put against one particular people. Or we don't actually end up doing, trying to justify why we can get away with a particular group of people rather than another group. So those four little words have opened up a massive can of worms for us. But the key thing around this whole thing is justice. And here in New Zealand we have that same problem. Same as in America, same as in Britain. Go to most of the countries in the world and you have this problem, and we have the ins and the outs. We have those who have the power and those who don't. And sometimes it's a combination of factors, but often it's a case of, one of the big things it says, he agrees, one of the big things that it said throughout the Old Testament, again and again and again, God says, I don't want your sacrifices, I want you to look after the orphans, the widows, I want justice. And the New Testament doesn't change that. And so this is the big thing. We need to look at these questions and ask ourselves, what does this mean for us as a people? And how do we change it even within our own little community? It's interesting, there's a book called Earth Abides by George Stewart, and the story basically is written in the 60s, and basically the story is the population of the world is 90% wiped out by a virus, and in the recovery period, obviously small groups of people start coming together. And one of these groups has a new member join them, and he's a male, and he has a sexually transmitted disease, which is going to be deadly for the community. And he takes a shine to the mentally retarded girl that they have in their community. And now they have a decision to make. Do they kill him? Or do they banish him? In which case then he'll just go and find another community and cause a problem. But there's an amazing piece of writing in the middle of this, and it's actually often used in, well, it was probably not so much these days, but it was used as an English as an example of really good English, because most of the words are monosyllables, some dual syllables, but it keeps it really fine. But this is what he wrote. This we do, not hastily. This we do, not in passion. This we do without hatred. This is not the battle when a man strikes fiercely and fear drives him on. This is not the hot quarrel when two strive for place or the love of a woman. Not the rope. Whet the axe. Pour the poison. Pile the faggots. This is the one who killed his fellow unprovoked. This is the one who stole the child away. This is the one who spat upon the image of our God. This is the one who leagued himself with the devil to be a witch. This is the one who corrupted our youth. This is the one who told the enemy of our secret places. We are afraid, but we do not talk of fear. We have many deep thoughts and doubts, but we do not speak of them. We say justice. We say the law. We say we the people. We say the state. In the end, they actually decide to put him to death in that particular story. Would you have agreed with their decision? These things are not easy. They're not simple. It'd be nice if they were, if we could put them into a box and just go, ticks that box, therefore that can happen. We're dealing with people. We're dealing with a broken world. And so we have to ask these really hard questions, and how do we deal with it? But what we do know is justice is what is required. Another big topic. You must not murder. So what about abortion? Another really hard one. One thing I think I can say with 99% confidence is that an unborn child is still a person. If we look in the Bible, it says he knit us together in our mother's womb. I knew you before you were born. So we cannot say, which a lot of the modern world wants to, a fetus is a thing, so we can just get rid of it. But even then, if you look at the laws around abortion in different countries, most countries won't do abortions in the third trimester. Why? What's the difference? What happened when it changed over from the second to the third trimester? Where do we draw that line again? What if the mother's life is in danger? Do we allow to kill then? What if the child is deformed? What if the child has cerebral palsy? There's some we can go, yeah, well, we think that's wrong, but then it gets grey and murky, and we look at it and go, right, I'm going out for a cup of wine or something. You know, this is the reality of it. We live in a broken world. It is not as simple as just going, abortion is wrong. Tick the box. It's much more complicated than that. But again, justice is what God requires, and we have to look and figure out what those answers are. And we need to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. It is a massive issue. And again, I'm covering these ones, I'm like doing broad brush strokes across them, just to get you thinking about the fact that these things like we must not murder have massive implications for us as a people and as a community and as a nation. There's another actually little interesting story for one of Philip K. Dick's ones. And this is sometime in the future, and they've decided that actually, given the fact that, you know, a child is pretty much useless for quite a while, you know, as a baby and everything else, you know, there's no real difference between them and an animal. So why don't we make it that that you can actually you can hand your child in basically. You just phone up a number and they come and collect it. You're going to use it deliberately. Come and collect it, and that's basically up until it can do advanced mathematics, which is around about 6 or 7. They work it out, it's about 6 or 7. So up until 6 and 7, you can phone in and they'll come and collect your child and take it away for you. And we laugh at that because it seems ridiculous. The question is why? You know, where is actually that line? Why is being born such a huge difference that we go from being a thing to a person? Why not when they can walk, or when they can crawl, or when they can speak? Why not? You know, if we're going to draw those lines, where do we actually draw them? You know, we might think that that's ridiculous, but the reality is that a lot of our laws and that are based on what society thinks. And if society as a whole determines that, you know, we actually, you know, maybe you have a child and you can't really afford it when it gets to 2 or 3, so why not? You know, hand it back to the state and let the state do whatever it wants. Which, in this case, they were actually putting them to death. But yeah, this is the thing, you know, we have to, again, we draw lines, arbitrary lines as people. And the answer's not simple. The answers are not nice and tick the box. And again, another massive issue. You shall not murder. And we get hit to abortion. Another one that's in the law, in the news very much at the moment. End of life bill. Who determines? Who determines when you're allowed to die? You know, technically God gives us life. We don't actually have the right to take it unless it's in specific cases. What if an 18-year-old wants to end their life? Is that any different to a 70-year-old wanting to end their life? Where do we draw that line? Do we say, oh, you have to be at least 75? Or where do we draw the line? Maybe if a person's on a machine and you switch the machine off and they can't live by themselves, is that okay? What if they're really suffering? And their quality of life, which we consider high, you know, we consider of importance these days, how do we determine that? How do we say that, yes, you're allowed to? In the Eskimos or the Inuits, what would often happen is the older people, once they felt they could no longer serve the community, they would just walk out into the blizzard and sit down and then basically freeze to death. It's actually not a bad way to go because hypothermia sets in and you actually don't feel anything, you just fall asleep. But again, that is, is that wrong? In New Zealand, my understanding is that if we knew someone was going to do that and we don't stop them, it's manslaughter. Is it right? Is it wrong? What is justice in that particular case? Massive. You know, these are 4 little words. You must not murder. And we've got into 3 cases of huge implications for how we, part of the reason why all of this was put down was to make the state of Israel, the state of the Judah and Israel at that stage, to be different to the nations around them. They were supposed to be, like we are supposed to be a shining light to the nation, they as a nation were supposed to be a shining light to the other nations. And so when we look at that list of things that they put people to death for, that was considered part of being a shining light in that time. And we've got to remember that's in that time compared to a lot of the other nations around. But these are not easy questions. The 4th one I wanted to cover, another massive, massive topic. Well, actually, probably should just mention one other thing about abortion before I move on, and that's the fact of the psychological and impacts of it. You know, one of the issues around it is, and I don't have any modern stats, but I know back in the 70s, the psychological impacts of having an abortion were quite significant. And that may be a cultural thing, I'm not sure, I don't know, but this is one of the issues, and some of the methods that are used for abortion are horrific. That's the other problem with it. But that still doesn't mean it's necessarily right or wrong. It's a question of then how do we look at it significantly and figure out Where do we draw that line? Fourth major topic. Suicide. Self-murder. The one thing I can say with absolute certainty in all my reading of Scripture, I've never found anywhere where it says that if you commit suicide you won't go to heaven. Suicide is part of the fall, it's part of the brokenness of human life, and God redeems. God is there to redeem that. And that is, I can say with 100% certainty. And we live in a broken world. That's partly why people commit suicide. You know, sometimes, I suffer from depression. I think most of you know that. Brain chemicals get out of balance. Life throws curveballs at you and you can't handle it. And that's part of the fall. It's part of the broken world in which we live. I mean, there's some days when I would quite happily commit suicide, but I can't be bothered. It's too messy. I'm a coward. Yeah, I really want an on-off switch. Just switch off, and that would be it. But the reality is that it's part of brokenness. It's part of the brokenness of the world. It's not. It's the same as people who murder or people who do other things. It's part of the brokenness in which we live. Suicide is not, it's not a no ticket to heaven type thing which you sometimes hear people say. But it is part of the brokenness of life. And it's massive. Again, another huge issue. I mean, for me personally, one of the ways that I deal with it is that basically I'm with Peter. Lord, where else should I go? You have the words of eternal life. And that's really quite often the rock on which I have to stand sometimes. It's not always fun, let's put it that way. But this is a reality. This is part of what being in a broken world exists. So there you go. We've gone over, taken 4 little words, and we've covered 4 major topics. And nearly all of them revolve around justice. And that is why God is so concerned with justice. Because it's the root and the core of how we treat other people to a large extent. In terms of, just natural treating other people. If you include God's love on top of that, and the fact that Jesus came to redeem us, we have far more hope than most other people. But it is justice at the end of the day that God is really concerned with, all the way through the Old Testament. The orphans, the widows. Don't give me sacrifices, give me justice. End of the day, that is the critical thing. And that's what part of what Jesus came to redeem us from. Came to redeem us from injustice. The blind will see. Broken-hearted will be bound up and made well. This is an incredible gospel that we have. And it touches all of these big topics. That we can actually go, we can help people who are in prison. We can help people who are struggling through depression. We can help people who are wanting to have abortions. We are part of a community. We can stand alongside them. That's part of what we're called to do, part of what being salt and light means. There's often we think just in terms of our individual, save the soul. But we actually have to think wider than that. We are a community. We live, I don't, but most of you live in Chatterton, but the reality is that, this is our community. And so it is, part of all of these plans and stuff like that are part of what we can actually do to make that reach out and help. So we started with 4 little words, and we covered topics which we could talk about for hours and hours and hours, and we wouldn't even start to cover them. So as I said, I've just done huge brushstrokes across them, just maybe to get you thinking about what this actually means for me here in Te in my own life. How do I respond when some people says, oh, we should just kill them all? And some people do. I had a friend in South Africa. Well, I mean, yeah, I suppose I probably shouldn't get into politics, but was an Australian person once said to one of my South African friends, he said, yeah, you didn't do the same as we did in Australia. We just wiped them all out. You go, okay, right, yeah. This is, that is not justice. That is part of the brokenness, and that is not what God wants by any means. And so we need to think about these topics, and we need to at least have in our own heads some form of how, when people ask us about maybe these things, what we're actually going to say. But there is no easy answer. There is no just tick the box and this will all go away. Because we deal with real people in real situations, and they are not often in those situations because of their own fault. It's a combination of a whole bunch of stuff. And so we really have to be compassionate, be like Jesus, and spread the love of God and the compassion of God to the people that we meet. And that's really what it boils down to. In a sense, we can't save anybody, because God is the only person who can give somebody new life. We can't do that. But we can be his hands and his feet, and we can show them who Jesus is. And that's really what we are called to do, to be salt and light, and to do that to the people we meet. Let's pray.